Holiday lunch was already loud when it happened. Plates clinked. Someone laughed too hard. The smell of food hung heavy in the air. Then my mom looked straight at me and said it. Not angry, not raised, cold. "You should leave," she said, "and stop relying on the family." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I was still holding a serving spoon, mid-motion, mid-breath. No one reacted. Not my dad, not my siblings. The room didn't explode. It froze. That silence told me more than her words ever could. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. No one did. My mom went back to her plate like she hadn't just erased me. And that's when something inside me shifted. Not anger, clarity. Because stop relying on the family was a strange thing to say, especially to the person who had quietly been holding everything together. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I stood up calmly, pushed my chair in, and said nothing. They watched me walk away like this was normal, like I'd done something wrong. I went to the guest room and closed the door. That's where the truth finally caught up with me. Not about them, about myself, and about what would happen the moment they learned what not relying on the family actually meant. I didn't grow up being loud. I wasn't the one who argued at the table. I wasn't the one who needed attention. I was the one who handled things. If something went wrong, I fixed it. If something was missing, I covered it. If someone was stressed, I stepped in. That became my role so gradually. No one ever questioned it. At family gatherings, people talked over me. Decisions were made without asking my opinion. And somehow, I was still expected to help. My mom liked to say I was independent. She said it like a compliment. What she really meant was convenient, because independence looks great when it saves everyone else effort. I paid attention to details others ignored. Dates, deadlines, small problems before they grew teeth. No one saw that as strength. They saw it as background noise. Something always working, something always there. That's why her words at lunch landed so wrong. Stop relying on the family. Because from where I stood, that sentence was upside down. They thought I was leaning on them. They thought my calm meant need. They thought silence meant weakness. They never asked what I carried. They never checked what would happen if I simply stopped. And that belief shaped everything. The confidence, the dismissal, the ease with which she told me to leave. They weren't being cruel. They were being careless. And carelessness is dangerous when it's built on assumptions that have never been tested. That lunch wasn't about kicking me out. It was about revealing how wrong they'd been for years. My name is Elena. I'm 41 years old enough to recognize patterns, old enough to know when silence is being mistaken for weakness. At work, people listen when I speak. They trust my judgment. They don't second-guess my decisions. At home, I was something else. The dependable one, the flexible one, the one who could handle it. No one ever said it directly, but everyone acted like I had endless capacity. If a bill caused stress, it somehow landed with me. If plans fell apart, I was expected to adjust. If something needed smoothing over, I did it quietly. I didn't mind at first. Helping felt natural. Being useful felt like belonging. But usefulness has a way of turning into expectation when no one is asked to return it. My mom, especially, relied on that. Not openly, not gratefully, just confidently. Like my support was part of the furniture, always there, never questioned. That's why her words at lunch cut so deep. Stop relying on the family. Because by 41, you know when a statement doesn't match reality. You know when someone has flipped a story to protect their own comfort. I wasn't being asked to grow up. I was being asked to disappear quietly without disrupting the system I'd helped build. And sitting alone in that guest room, with my coat folded on the bed and my phone silent, I realized something important. This wasn't about dependence. It was about control. And the moment control is challenged, everything changes. Section 4. Would I SAW clearly FORTHE first time? I stayed in that guest room longer than I needed to. Not because I was unsure, because I was finally seeing things clearly. Through the thin walls, I could hear them laughing again. The clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs. Life moved on fast without me. That told me everything. No one came to check on me. No one asked if I was okay. No one wondered if they'd gone too far. My mom's voice floated down the hallway, calm and steady, like nothing had happened. That was her gift. She didn't argue. She erased. I thought back to every moment I'd ignored before. The times I wasn't consulted but expected to help. The way my opinions were too much until my money wasn't. The quiet assumption that I would always step in. I realized something uncomfortable. They didn't see my support as generosity. They saw it as obligation. Something owed. Something permanent. And permanence makes people careless. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my suitcase. I hadn't planned to pack that day, but packing felt right. Not rushed. Not emotional. Intentional. Each folded item felt like a boundary taking shape. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out of a role I'd never agreed to play. Out in the dining room, someone raised a toast. I didn't hear what they said, but I knew it wasn't about me. And that silence, that ease with which they continued, made one thing very clear. If I walked out quietly now, they would assume I always would. They would never imagine what silence was about to cost them. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a speech. I finished packing, zipped the suitcase, and took one last look around the room. Nothing dramatic, nothing sentimental, just a clean ending. When I walked back through the hallway, the lunch was still going, plates half full, voices relaxed, my chair already pushed in, like I'd never been there. My mom glanced up as I passed. Not worried, not surprised, relieved. That look stayed with me. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder, more honest. I loaded my suitcase into the car and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting it. This was the part where people usually cry. I didn't. I felt steady, because clarity doesn't come with noise. On the drive back to my place, I replayed her words again. Stop relying on the family. They echoed differently now, not as an insult, as instructions. And for the first time, I decided to take her at her word, not emotionally, practically. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan a confrontation. I planned separation, clean lines, clear boundaries, no confusion. By the time I reached my apartment, the decision was already made, not out of anger, out of respect for myself. I set the suitcase down, took off my coat, and opened my laptop, not to write a message, not to explain, to do something far more final. Because when people tell you to stop relying on them, they rarely expect you to stop supporting them too. I didn't rush. That was important. I read every line twice, checked every date, made sure nothing could be undone by accident. This wasn't about emotion. It was about accuracy. I opened accounts I hadn't looked at in months. Some I barely remembered setting up. Others I remembered too well. Utilities, insurance, maintenance. Things that had quietly become handled, not by them, by me. I realized how invisible that kind of work is until it stops. I paused more than once, hovering over a button, not out of doubt, out of disbelief. How had this much responsibility slowly slid onto me without anyone ever saying thank you? One by one, I made changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just confirmations. Each one felt lighter than the last, like loosening a grip I didn't know I'd been holding for years. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt relief, the kind that comes when you finally stop correcting a story that was never true. By the time I finished, the room was quiet. No messages, no calls. They still didn't know. They were still laughing, still eating dessert, still believing everything worked on its own. I closed my laptop and leaned back because I knew something they didn't yet. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means the shift hasn't reached them yet. And when it did, it wouldn't arrive gently. The first message came the next morning, not angry, confused. Do you know why the payment didn't go through? I read it once and set the phone down. 10 minutes later, another message followed. Something's wrong with the account. That's when I knew. They weren't panicking yet. They were still assuming this was a glitch, a mistake someone else would fix. By noon, the tone shifted. Calls replaced texts. Shorter messages. Less confidence. My mom finally called. I let it ring. Then she left a voicemail, her voice careful. Can you call me back? We just need to clarify a few things. Clarify, not apologize. Not ask how I was. Clarify. That word told me everything. They didn't miss me. They missed what stopped working. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time from my brother. Why are services suspended? Did you change something? I stared at the screen, noticing how quickly they'd jumped to blame. Not concern. Assumption. They still believed I was responsible for fixing this, because that's how it had always been. I didn't respond, and that silence did more damage than any argument ever could, because with every unanswered call, they were forced to sit with a reality they'd never prepared for. Things were breaking, and the one person who usually stepped in was gone. By evening, confusion had turned into urgency. Messages came faster now, shorter, less careful. Can you explain what's going on? We need access. This can't wait. That was new. They weren't asking if I was okay. They weren't asking why I left. They were asking for control. My mom finally said what she'd been avoiding all day. Did you cancel things? No accusation, no softness. Just a sudden awareness that something had changed hands. I waited before replying. Not to be cruel, to be clear. Then I typed one sentence. I stopped relying on the family. That was all. The typing bubble appeared, stopped, appeared again, then nothing. Minutes passed. I imagined them checking accounts, calling providers, being told the same thing again and again. Authorization removed. Primary account holder changed. We can't override this. Words they'd never heard before. Words I'd heard many times while fixing things for them. Another message came through. This affects all of us. That one almost made me smile, because now they understood. This wasn't emotional distance. This was structural. The systems they depended on were built around someone they just told to leave. And once systems shift, they don't respond to guilt. They respond to reality. I put the phone down because the lesson had finally arrived, and it didn't need my voice to explain itself. The calls stopped late that night, not because things were fixed, because they weren't. They'd run out of people to call, out of excuses, out of authority. The next message from my mom was different. Short, careful. We need to talk about this. Not come back. Not we're sorry. Talk. As if conversation alone could rewind what had already happened. I didn't answer, because for the first time, I wasn't responsible for smoothing anything over. They were sitting with the consequences of a sentence they'd spoken without thinking. Stop relying on the family. Those words had finally finished echoing. My brother sent one message later that night. You didn't have to do it like this. That one revealed everything. Not, we were wrong. Not, we hurt you. Just disappointment that the safety net was gone. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of my apartment. No tension. No waiting for the next crisis. Just space. And in that space, I realized something simple and heavy. They hadn't lost me that day at lunch. They lost me the moment they believed I would always stay, no matter how I was treated. By the time morning came, whatever version of me they'd relied on no longer existed, and there was nothing dramatic about it, just a line that had finally been drawn. They didn't apologize, not in the way that matters. They spoke carefully after that, chose softer words, avoided the sentence that started everything. But some things can't be unsaid. I didn't go back, not to explain, not to negotiate, not to fix what broke, because nothing was broken by accident. They told me to leave. They told me to stop relying on them. I listened. And for the first time in my life, I didn't soften the result. My days became quieter, No emergency calls. No sudden problems to solve. No invisible weight pulling at me from every direction. I noticed how much energy I'd spent maintaining a version of myself that kept everyone else comfortable. Without that role, there was space. Space to rest. Space to think. Space to decide what I actually wanted. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Family, I learned, isn't defined by who needs you the most. It's defined by who sees you, even when you stop giving. They thought removing me would restore order. What it did was reveal how much they'd been leaning without acknowledging it. And when I finally stopped holding everything up, nothing dramatic happened. Things simply became honest. And honesty, for the first time, felt like freedom.